Oh yeah, my friend, it's an honor. It's the first time. They always say the first time is the best. And man, it's an honor to have you on the radio show. Love the project. There's a lot to talk about. But first of all, for people that don't recognize your beautiful face or voice, who's the man behind the glasses? Who the hell are you?
Well, hi everybody. I'm Andrew Paley. I'm part of the Static Age. I sing and play guitar in that band, and I also do stuff as a solo artist under my own name.
Yes, yes, and it's so cool. There's new stuff, but before getting into the band and your solo career, I'm curious, when you were a kid, how did you discover music and who influenced you around you, parents, friends, or whatever, into discovering the
Yeah.
world of music?
It's a little bit my mom and dad for sure. My mom was always an avid music fan, and so I grew up with everything from, the Beatles to a bunch of stuff she was into from the 80s, like Tears for Fears and Cyndi Lauper. And my dad actually is also a musician, so he played guitar when I was growing up, and there were instruments around the house. And at some point, I don't know exactly which year it was, I took a real interest in it. I think at first it was playing around with the family's keyboard. So I just like making noise with that thing. And then at some point, I started to figure out a few chords on the guitar and sort of snowballed from there. And then I guess actually when I was about 12 or 13, there was an all ages club in the city I grew up in, or outside of Burlington, Vermont, called 242 Main. And I started going to punk shows there. So that was the second, the second set of influences.
And how was the scene at that time? Because, like you said, you were from Vermont. It's not the place or the mecca of punk rock, as
Yeah.
people know.
Fair question. Though actually, Burlington, Vermont has a had at the time and continues to have a really cool scene around it. It kind of worked out. A lot of the cities in the Northeast are pretty close together, so we got some surprising bands to stop over at an all ages club somewhere between Boston and Montreal, and so I saw a ton of shows growing up from, all sorts of bands playing that room, from AFI to Converge to a lot of really cool local bands. A band, actually the original drummer of the Static Age, Bobby Hackney, is in a band called Rough Francis out of Vermont now that is quite phenomenal. So yeah, the scene up there is, I know we were in the woods in the middle of nowhere, but the scene up there was actually pretty great and continues to be pretty great.
I'm not surprised, and you name band that we know, and it's cool. Of course, there's always a scene around, and that's what magic about music and punk rock. And there's also a lot of microbrewery craft beer around.
Also
So
that.
it's all go together, I'm sure.
Yeah. It doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt. Not so much at the all ages club, but at some point that became part of it too, for sure.
And that's another interesting thing, it's not every city that have, all ages show. And it
Yeah,
was a cool thing because it bring, younger kids that discover band. And I think it kind of miss at the end of the 90s. There was less and less, all age venues all around the world. And I think that would, make us think that there was no, another generation coming. But actually,
yeah.
it's coming right now, and it's cool to see that, a lot of you been inspired them.
Oh, well, I mean, I like to think I was some sort of a link in the chain. So there were a lot of people who came before me that inspired me too, right? So, I think, yeah, I think we were really lucky to have that kind of an all ages venue, and I do think they're coming back. It seems like that. I know COVID created some problems for a lot of small to medium sized venues, unfortunately, um, but yeah, 242 Main in particular was a phenomenal piece of my youth and a lot of people who grew up in Burlington's youths. I think, frankly, my whole life trajectory was probably changed significantly by my being able to go from middle school all the way through high school to somewhere to see live music many times a month, and also in a way that was accessible, in a way that felt like, oh, my friends can get up on stage and do this. I can get up on. I can create things like this. It was really inspiring, and the DIY punk scene in general, but especially, around all ages clubs, so everyone has access.
It's cool. It's cool. We had chance to have club like this, in Quebec back in the days. It's changed a lot. Unfortunately, there's not much of those venues here anymore, and in Montreal. But yeah, I remember as a kid, I was into metal, and at that time, metal was so big, it was kind of not accessible. It was like pop, man. They got Bodyguard, and it was like and when you
Right.
go to punk rock show, people were there, man. And I remember my first Vans Warped Tour or first gig, seeing the band at the merch table, and that's I think get a lot of people into to being part of that family and really feel a part of it. More you go to show, more you realize that it's the same faces, and it's cool to see new faces, and the nostalgia get people back, and I think we have the mix of everything right now.
Yeah, yeah. I think I agree. There's a real community around the punk scene that I hope is still there, but has always felt like it's there for me, where it's not just about the bands, it's about everybody who's at the show, which is unique, I think, to other forms of music.
We talk about how you discover music, but do you remember when you start playing, or that day that you realize, I think I can do that?
That's a good question. The day, I think, um, well, there's a few moments on that journey. I think early on I was inspired to write songs. Like even before I really knew how to play chords on the keyboard, I was kind of trying to come up with melody lines, and I was building on things, and it felt like it was exciting to be able to generate something from nothing. And so that was always really inspiring to me. Um, I think in terms of bands, my God, man, I was in uh some pretty bad bands in middle school. And I think there was one moment where my friends and I, we'd been playing in a garage, and we were at 242 Main, there was a show happening. And I think it might have been The Business that was playing. And all the other bands had not been able to show up. And they were like, does anybody want to jump up and play? And I mean, it was probably regrettable in retrospect. I hope there aren't any videos of this, frankly. But yeah, we jumped up on stage and played a few songs, made our way through them, and I remember thinking, somehow I'm a little bit embarrassed, but also I'm really excited about the fact that this is possible. So I think that show, even though maybe it could have worked out to the contrary, was gave me the feeling like, let's do this for real. Let's actually go try to build a thing. And so that was part of it. There were also some really phenomenal bands when I was coming up out of Burlington. Common Ground was a really amazing hardcore band out of Burlington that Bobby actually was also in. And I was a huge fan of theirs. They were all a few years older than I was, but they really inspired me. A band called Jesus Nut was a really phenomenal punk band out of Burlington as well. And so, yeah, it wasn't just the bands that were touring through, it was also the bands that were right there and you became friends with. And then that was inspiring. Like, how can I be a part of building something like this?
Yeah, it's such interesting. You mentioned so many interesting points, and you're right. Like building something from nothing, and it's the same with a scene. It's the unity, and it's people connect together.
Yeah,
And I always said, I don't think, without the Gilman family and the Gilman Street back in the days, there would be no Operation Ivy. It's everybody, and like you
100%.
said, it's a shame. There's so many bands that I spoke with that like people are like, hey, you didn't get the success of those huge band Offspring, Blink. What the hell happened? And they're like, man, we influence so many other band that get there, like maybe Rise Against, like as an example. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
everybody has a place, and I think you just have to accept the place you are and make the best of it. And there's always ups and downs, but at the end, you're so proud of doing what you love and doing for yourself.
Yeah, man. Amen to that. And it's a little trite, but there's that saying, it's not the destination, it's the journey. Like, and honest to God, man, it really, to my mind, that's always been the more interesting thing. Like all of the adventures we've had with all of my friends in all of these different ways, all around the world, have been yeah, the journey's been the blast for sure.
How the band started up? How did you met, and how that crazy idea germs into a band?
um, so the first couple bands I was in, we started touring, and I think when I was actually like 15, and we were just sort of I was like I said, there were a few people who were older than me that were probably more in charge of actually booking stuff. I was maybe a little bit more along for the ride at that point. But I got involved with those things early, and that's how I met Bobby. And then through that, also Adam, the bass player of the Static Age, he was in a couple of other bands. And so our bands were just playing together all the time. And it was, again, one big family. Uh, and somewhere along the way, the bass player of Bobby and my band, we were in a band together called In Reach, and the bass player of our band had to step away to go do family related stuff. And we were looking for a replacement. And Adam actually was a guitarist, but he basically was like, I can totally play bass. I'll go buy a bass tomorrow. Like, we're going to do this. And that little unit originally was called the Hemlock Verdict with another guy, Spencer. And that evolved into the Static Age. So yeah, the roots of the band go way back to not quite middle school, but pretty close, early high school. And then it evolved through a few iterations into, again, what became the Static Age.
I love those story when you really sure you're gonna play guitar, and all those hours spent just changing into, God damn,
Yeah,
I will play the bass, man.
yeah. I mean, it worked out. It worked out. It translated. He's a phenomenal bass player, even if he didn't set out day zero to be that. Um, but yeah, man, it's just it was all a little bit of an evolution. And then I think there was a moment for us where we'd been playing in these punk and hardcore bands, and there'd always been this other set of influences that we loved. The Psychedelic Furs and the Chameleons and the Cure, and just sort of another well of influence in this post-punk sort of new wave space. And so when we started the Static Age, it was a conscious choice to like, let's try to do a different thing. Like, let's just try some sounds that we hadn't, or like a palette that we hadn't played with before. But in spirit, we were very much still a punk rock band. We were still playing punk shows. We were still touring with punk bands. It was, yeah, it was an experiment, but it was one we really enjoyed.
And I think the first record was released what in 2003, 2004.
Yeah. It's there was a demo in 2002, but the first proper album was 2004, 2005.
And that's what I love and got me, because when I told you I was a metalhead, I switched at the end of the 90s, somewhere like 98. So at that point, I love punk rock, but I was looking for something different. And when I listened to that record, it's really surprised me, like how open-minded you were, and that's why I was interesting of knowing where the roots came from. But it's cool because I think musicians that are really open-minded about music are the one that go into more direction, and that's where it get really more interesting when you're a geek like me
Yeah.
about music.
Here's well, same. So I too I would count myself in that geekdom. But yeah, I think for me, like honestly, punk rock itself is about not having rules, right? So the idea that there's a lot of space to play with even just a guitar, but certainly when you get into keyboards and when you start to layer things differently, there's all sorts of different directions you can go. And so I think we had a lot of fun wandering around in that space. And even now, like, I think the Static Age has defined a sound for itself across a handful of albums. But again, in the solo work, it's been really fun because I can sort of just go wherever I'm inspired to go at any given moment. And so yeah, I still love playing in as wide a space as possible, I guess.
Yeah, it's cool. You didn't stuck in just a line, there was a lot of direction through the records, and it's cool. And the evolution is pretty amazing. Like you said, it starts with something kind of, it's always goofy, trying to find a new sounds, but after that you define something that a lot of bands try to recreate or just enjoy playing in their own style, and pay respect to. And it's cool when people say, oh yeah, the Static Age, yeah, huge influence. You're like, yeah, Cool. And I get it now. I listen to some bands. I'm like, okay. But it was the case with television. I'm sure there was, when punk rock explodes and people knock at their door, like, oh, you were like pre-punk. And they're like, what the hell, man? There was even not a word. So how can we know we were pre something? And it's
Right,
just
right. Yeah.
music, it's creating. And it's just cool that people got so interesting that they trying to define and categorize, but at the end you're yourself, and that's the magic and the chemistry behind you guys. so
Cheers,
uh
man. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
so the question is it more easy or more hard to write now and create new stuff with the experience, because it can be like you know
Oh, yeah. That's a good question. Um, I think in the scope of like the Static Age, at some point it did feel like, well, there's some, the boundaries are blurry, but there's something here that I wouldn't want to, make a record that sounds nothing like what the band has been. I think there's some continuity to a singular creation that you have to honor, at least to some extent. Like, you don't have to stick to the second album doesn't have to sound exactly like the first, but it can't sound like a completely different band. There's some continuity there that there's also a really powerful, important thing about, right? Like, that it gives you a space. Sometimes creativity is best when it's somehow constrained. Like, if the infinity of all possibilities are on the table, it sort of becomes a random thing versus you have to work within some sort of box and try to break outside of it in different ways. So within the scope of the Static Age, there were positives and, I guess I wouldn't say negatives, but challenges there. In the solo space, sort of making a conscious decision to, I'm just going to start writing on different instruments, in different scenarios. I'm going to be more willing to work on a song and throw it out halfway through, or work on a song and completely change what it is by the time I'm actually recording it. I've had a little bit more room to play. So maybe that's been fun. That's been a fun element to that.
Yeah, and then it's another way to surprise people and show as a musician that you're not sticking to doing just a thing.
Right.
And
And also to discover stuff, right? Like, the act of writing to me is sort of feels like it's like you're in a dark room or something, or like a cave, and you light a candle and you get to sort of explore, wander in a certain direction and be like, oh, there's nothing over here after all. Spent 2 days on that. There's nothing. Retreat, come back, try a different direction. And so that act of exploring the space of what's possible is the most fun thing about songwriting, to me, at least.
yeah, yeah. And you said it, like the challenge too. It had to be somewhere a little struggle to bring something, because when you put so much in it, so much heart, it infused something that it get people, and I think the lyrics are a good weapon for that.
Hmm. Yeah, can be, for sure. Yeah.
And talking about diversity isn't something that always come naturally, or when you talk about making a new records, or as a solo artist, you have a vision of the direction the album's gonna go, or you just let really the flow go.
It For the solo stuff, it's been more like working over a period of time to put together a set of songs, and there always end up being like 4 or 5 times as many songs as what ends up on a record, because over a course of like a year or two, I'll just make sure I'm carving out time to go be creative. So there's less of an idea at the beginning, and there's more of an idea or a theme or a collection that emerges across a whole bunch of different sessions, which is quite different from an album with a band where you have to actually coordinate across other people. And I think there's still that process of songwriting with the band, but there's a lot less. We don't experiment with 50 or 60 songs to come up with 10. It's more like 15 or 20 become 10, just because there's more coordination and more effort across a wider group of people. So I guess maybe one way to put it is I'm more focused on what I bring to the band than what I'm willing to spend a couple of days on just playing around with layers on my own for a solo song.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And it's different focus, so different
Yeah,
energy.
yeah, exactly. Right, and there's another piece there, which is with solo songs, it's all me just sort of layering things and playing with ideas. When I bring it to the band, it morphs into something else, because Adam and Joe, our current drummer, and they their influences, their playing style, the things they care about sort of become part of the song as well at that point. And it's not just me in a room anymore.
You tour with one of my favorite band those days. I listened to them so much. SNUFF.
Um, oh, do oh, Snuff. Sorry, I thought you were saying SNFU. Sorry, I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Snuff.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
it's it.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
just
as a
last.
Canadian, I could bring that up.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, rest Mr. Chai. But yeah, no, the other,
yeah.
like
The
it's
other one,
their
yeah. When you spelled it out, it kind
SNFU
of
and
broke my brain for a second.
SNUFF. Yeah, snuff. I should
Snuff.
have
Yeah.
said I should have went for snuff like all the way. My bad.
No worries, no worries. But yeah, no, yeah, they were we did I think 10 shows with them last year. Over in like Germany and Denmark, just Central Europe. But yeah, they were great. They're awesome. Really lovely band. I myself was a fan of them growing up too, so it was a little surreal. Um but yeah, we had a blast together. It was like an interesting pairing, but we share a label over there, and so when we were both looking to tour in the same time frame, we got paired up, and it worked out super well, I think, all the way around.
That's another thing, I think with the pandemic also it really, it shows there for the right reason. And a lot of label made like spam in Europe, like people of punk rock here, Thousand Island Record. There's so much great label behind the band now. And at some point it's really interesting because it bring interest again into punk rock and to punk music. And I think that with the pandemic, a lot more people got, like I said, the nostalgia and got back to the scene.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's for sure part of it. It also feels like there's a lot of new vibrant bands coming up that um it reminds me of like really great punk rock came out of the Reagan era because the Reagan era was fucked up and a lot of people had a lot of thoughts and feelings and things to say about it. And I sort of feel like somewhere certainly with what's been happening in the US over the last decade and then some really, but politically um and the pandemic, I think there's a and what's happening with climate change and other social issues, it feels like there's a lot to say again. And so there's a real youthful energy that's driving a new wave of punk rock. Um, and yeah, making for some excellent music and some really cool bands. So I think that's part of it too, from at least what I can tell. There's a nostalgia element, there's a lot of these new labels, but there's just a lot of sort of phenomenal new stuff coming out right now.
It's so true. And I said, people like years ago, I was like, kids are coming, man. They're
Yeah.
pissed. They want to conquer the world. And think about it. Like you're 17 or 16, playing guitar, and then the pandemic hit. Like you have
Yeah.
2 years on your hand. A lot of those kids wrote songs and start band, and
Yeah.
they're here. And it's crazy, when I see like Flail Records, like there's a way like the Days and Days, and all those kids are really into those band, and there's a lot of them, and it's really working well. They're building
Yeah.
brick by brick, but it's feel like, back in the days where there was something cool about it, and something that, because everybody was waiting for the kids.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Flail is a really great example. Like the whole scene around Flail Records is really, really cool. Like there's some fantastic bands and it's all truly DIY. And the footprint for that label and those bands being as big as it and is such a unique scene. Like it's another sign of like punk rock can be whatever you make it. Um, but yeah, I really respect the shit out of like Scott and the whole Flail Records crew. They're
Yeah,
awesome.
I met Scott, with when he was on tour with Bridge City Sinner, and he said the coolest thing, man. He came to me and said, "Man, I know you. You're DJ Punkcast Bad." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, there's a guy in Menton that came to me and said that dude play you for many years, man, when you started up." And yeah, it is such a great dude, man. And I
Yeah,
like it. That's what I'm looking for. And that's what I said. It's crazy that you guys, in 2003 released the records like that. But it creates something that took years, but every record's bringing more people and more people.
Yeah.
and it's another thing. It brings something more to the band than just the music, you know.
Yeah, man. I'm happy to hear you say that. I mean, that's how it feels to me, but you never know if it feels like that to anybody outside of what you're doing. But yeah, awesome.
The last single I think was Traffic Dreams. I was gonna be the rest of the year for the Static Age, and what's coming up for you guys?
So we've been working on an album for the last couple of years. It's sort of been this perennial thing. We've been saying it's we're working on it now, any minute now. Um, it's been a really fun process in a lot of ways. It's also just been there are a lot of things competing for all of our attention, so sometimes it's harder to get together than others. But yeah, so we've got a handful of shows coming up. We're doing there's a band called Dead on a Sunday out of Denver that's been doing some stuff, a lot of stuff lately. And Ross, actually the singer of that band and the main guy behind that band, has some other projects. One's called Stay Loose, and he and I have collaborated on other songs together before. And so they're coming through. We're going to play a handful of shows with them around Chicago. That's in October. So we're doing like Ohio and maybe Detroit. I have to look at that. Chicago and Minneapolis. So that'll be really fun. Working on the record with the band, and we'll be releasing more singles off that coming in the coming months. And then looking at going back over to Europe sometime like spring, summer next year, though that's a little hazier. We're working out some details on that right now.
It's so cool to hear that, and of course we're gonna wait for you guys in Canada because we love you.
Oh, cheers, man. We'd love
Of
to
course,
get back. Yeah,
Quebec.
we haven't been back in a while. That's
Yeah,
we're overdue for sure. Well, actually, we were supposed to play Huza last year, and then there was a whole disaster with getting our drummer and second guitarist got stranded, couldn't fly out. So I ended up playing that as a solo show, which was a little funny. But we would love to come back actually around and actually Quebec City. We want to hit Montreal, want to hit Toronto. It's been too long.
yeah, but at least that's cool. Milo did the same with the Descendant. The rest of the band didn't catch their flight. It was their first show at Saguenay. It was kind of a huge thing, but I don't know. Milo maybe came a day before,
Okay.
just to see the place and act as a tourist, and then he was there, so he play solo and face to face join him and play
Yeah,
some
yeah.
Descendant son. So making the best of it, but that's so
Yeah.
cool. At least you were there.
Yeah. We did something there. It was not quite a full band thing, but yeah, those I saw clips of that Milo set. That was awesome. That was awesome.
So yeah, of course we're gonna wait. And as a solo artist, what's coming up? I'm sure you're always working on stuff.
Yeah. So I'm also working on another solo album right now. There's going to be an EP in sort of the later fall. I'm going to release 3 or 4 songs as an EP. And then like March, April, sometime springtime, I'm going to shoot for a whole album. So yeah. And then there'll be shows around that as well. I'll probably build off of the European dates and do a solo run. But again, that's to be determined exactly when that'll be. But finish the album first. Got to stay focused on that until it's done.
That's when you have to join their Facebook, man. Keep yourself posed to be continued.
Yeah,
or,
right.
or it's gonna be on the part two of the interview. I always said they have to be a part two. There's so many questions.
For sure. Yeah, no, happy to come back for a part 2. Absolutely.
And what's the best way to directly encourage you? Of course, as a solo artist, but with the band, I know people got music budget. They're collectors. There's people that want shirts, whatever.
Cool. Yeah. So highwires.com. There's a little label collective that I've been a part of for a long time, and there are a few other people involved with it. And at this point, the Highwires store, which is store.highwires.com, is where you can grab Static Age stuff as well as solo stuff. So whatever merch we have left over from a tour, we'll throw up there. Some albums, some vinyl, and some other things are available there as well.
And I'm curious, how does the collective record work?
So it's actually evolved a little bit. It's been around for, man, over a decade now.
Wow.
At one point, there were a few different bands released on it. The bands were involved in sort of the process of actually releasing, and it was it really was run like a collective. And then at this point, Felix, the Static Ages manager, over in Berlin, and I are probably the principal two people who are actively involved with it at this point.
That's so cool. People go, of course, encourage them. Andrew, you're amazing. Seriously, it was worth the wait.
Cheers. Cheers, man. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the questions and the time.
Thank you. And actually, for our 15 years, we couldn't wish better.
I really appreciate it. And congrats on 15 years, man. That's a milestone. That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's crazy. It's like with the band. Can you remember like the first gig?
I can, yes. Can you remember your first radio show?
Yeah, it was a disaster.
I mean, most firsts. Our first show was on the line. You know, I don't know. I think we barely made it through. I wouldn't call it a full on disaster, but it was a stretch. But you know, you learn. You learn while you, what is it? You're building the plane while you're flying it. So yeah.
And it proved that, sometimes it's just to go there and try it. It's a disaster, but the fun you have. I remember first time I did snowboard. Oh my God. I was on my ass the whole ride, and then but there was something fun, and then you get to it and you get better, and you knew there was something there. So
Yeah,
yeah, and
man.
inspire people to do it. So man, thank you, Andrew. Go grab a mic, and of course encourage the band. Go see them live. There's date, there's show, buy tickets, and if you don't have any money to grab merch, just go sing fucking loud.
Cheers. Yeah, just listen to it however you can find it. That's what I care about most. So yeah,
Thank
cheers.
you, Andrew. Say hi to everyone in the band, and we wait for you in Quebec, of course. Thank you,
All
brother.
right. Cheers. Thanks, Eric.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye.
What you need, no more inhibition.